Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Anderson, would you want to assume the position here? What better way to begin 2018 with the highly controversial master plan, the Energized Public Spaces Functional Master Plan. Thank you, everybody. We had a good presentation about this the other day. And Ms. Michelson, you want to take us through this? Or Mr. Anderson, did you want to make any comments, or planning board make any introductory
I think we covered most of it the other day, but the point here is to give us the legal predicate for being able to acquire urban parkland when the opportunity becomes available, and as well as a methodology for trying to figure out where park acquisitions in more intensively developed areas are justified, because everybody in every neighborhood in the county thinks that they don't have enough parks. So this is a way to try to evaluate those needs a little bit more objectively. And the bigger picture is that we're trying to fill in a piece of the park program in this county that has not necessarily been the central organizing principle in the past, and it will join stewardship and recreation in the more suburban and rural park acquisitions that have happened in the past, and really hopefully complete the park system and deliver what it needs to be in the future.
Mr. Riley?
Thank you, Mike Riley, Parks Director. It's great to be here. I'm very excited about this plan. You know, I have budget on my mind as we're heading into the budget.
Well, there is that, yeah.
And that just kind of hones my interest in priorities and how important it is to make sure that we have our work program prioritized in this particular area where acquisitions are going to be very expensive, and also to be keenly focused on how we're going to be creative, knowing that money is not going to be the solution to how we're going to have great parks in our high population areas. We have to have a menu of other options to achieve that goal, and I think this plan includes that.
Well, I have to say, you know, after we went through the Bethesda master plan, my reaction is, well, what about every place else? And this really does help to focus that, I think, particularly Silver Spring. I think that I understand that to be sort of the pilot area, and that was really where my mind was when I was thinking of how we were focusing on the development contribution to that initiative in Bethesda. So addressing other communities, I think, is really important. So with that, Ms. Michelson.
Thank you. I'll add only one other comment by way of introduction, and that is that over the years, the council has been concerned about how you prioritize park acquisition and the development of parks. And this presents a really sophisticated set of tools. First, for differentiating areas with the highest population, poverty, the need for resources from those areas where there might be a different level of need. And then second, within these areas that are designated, a way to prioritize even further, to look at demand and supply in very sophisticated manners. And I think it'll be a great tool for the department to use, and also for the council to be aware of as you have to make some budget choices and decisions. So I really want to commend the department on this effort. I think it really is excellent. And you'll see that the council really did get very few comments about the plan, and I have very few changes to recommend. In fact, most were recommended by Department of Parks staff themselves after hearing the public hearing testimony, which they've kindly summarized and is attached to the end of the packet on the circle numbers. So let me take you through. I think in your briefing you really heard a lot of the highlights, so I don't feel like I need to tell you a lot about what's in the plan. I think you've already heard that. One of the important things is that the implementation strategies on page 2 focus first on how to use existing parkland more effectively. So it talks about activating them, connecting parks, renovating and repurposing them, and then developing new parks only when one of these other options cannot succeed. And so some of the testimony you received talked about what was the cost of this going to be and how would we be able to afford it. And I think this provides the department with a great way to look at what are the existing resources, how can they be used the most efficient ways possible, and when we actually do need additional parkland, how can we develop priorities? And I think this plan will get us there.
But this is not going to exclude our commitment to park experiences elsewhere.
No, not at,
I mean, that's important to remember.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. The plan does discuss a variety of different implementation tools, options for partnerships, working together with the private sector, privately owned public spaces, and the unique role for the private sector to play in meeting some of these open space needs. And I think that's very important. And it also talks about being able to prioritize by a social equity factor, and now presents a way in which this data can play a part in the decision-making process, which is very helpful. And the only place I found fault at all is the section of the plan which suggests that the department will need a lot more resources to do this.
And
because-
wise to mention that.
Yes, and there are going to be times when that is the case, but I also felt that it's important that they do everything possible to achieve the greatest amount of efficiencies, to look for these innovative funding mechanisms, to get private sector contributions, because I wouldn't want anyone to walk away with the assumption that unless there was a significant amount of additional dollars, none of these recommendations could be implemented. Not to suggest that some of them won't, in fact, be dependent on additional funding, but that to try and have that broad range. And so in response to my suggestion, planning staff has already drafted some new language that indicates that there will be a variety of implementation tools, a need for increasing efficiencies, and opportunities for alternative funding. And I think this really gets at the concern that I had.
And this is not language that we have in the packet.
No, it's not in the packet. They saw the packet and they promptly
And-
suggested some new language.
Okay.
They also did suggest, and you'll see this on pages 4 and 5, in response to some of the testimony you received, some what I really call clarifications for the most part, clarification that the Whole Foods parking lot, which is identified in the Silver Spring pilot, they only intended for that to be used in the case of complete redevelopment, not that they'd be taking parking spaces away from the existing use. You did receive some testimony noting that the plan did not discuss climate change, and I think we are all well aware that additional green space and reducing need for using automobiles clearly impacts climate change, but we could be a little bit more explicit. So on page 4 of the memo in the middle of the page, you'll see in addition there, there was also some concern about the meaning of the specific opportunities identified in the appendix and what that meant. So there's clarification on that. And then finally, some concern that whether the plan was suggesting any change in property rights for privately owned public spaces, and that was not the intent. Privately owned public spaces would, in fact, retain their own current ownership. They would just be used by the public, perhaps under some agreement with the Department of Parks, perhaps not, but it would not change the ownership. So another clarification there. So with these changes that you see in the memo and the additional one Department of Park staff recommended here, I would recommend the committee endorse the plan, and let me know if there's anything else you want to discuss about it.
Well, I ask my colleagues if they want to wade into this debate here.
I'm not aware that there is a vigorous debate on this. It's hard to object to the idea of activating parks. I wonder if we could reach out to the gentleman who testified on the climate change request before this goes to full council to see if he, has any reaction to your suggestion.
Happy
I
to
had
do so.
promised him that we would add some language, and you've done that, and I appreciate that, but I'd love to get his reaction to it.
Mr. Reamer?
Thank you. I guess I view this as sort of a process that you've gone through to help shape your own work and your own planning and everything like that. So there isn't a tremendous, there's no decision point for us. You're just, you've gone through the process to help reorient your approaches. And so it's great to see, and I'm certainly enthusiastic about the vision here. I could probably leave it at that, like, great, this is exciting.
Right, you're not.
I don't know, if they're trying to find something to talk about here, I guess, other than nice job. Remind me, I see the language in here about a pilot area. What is that? Is that a thing, or is that for the purposes of discussion?
These folks and Christina, and by the way, Christina, I should have said this the other day, and I always hesitate to do this because I don't want to call attention to one staff person at the implied exclusion of others, but Christina has been an absolutely fantastic addition to the park staff, really has brought a lot of energy and new thinking, and she's only been here for what, maybe a year?
Almost two.
Almost two? Okay. Well, time flies. But she's already made some very significant contributions. This is among them. And Brooke Farquhar, who you may know, who just retired, was heavily involved in this. So it wasn't just Christina, it's the whole team here. But in any event, these folks came up with a very rigorous, systematic methodology for trying to figure out where do you need to get more parks, and what would be a rationale for why would we conclude that we need more parks in one place and not another, or more than in another place. And so we had to test it out somewhere and show and validate it. And so Silver Spring is really the first sort of test case, so you can see how the methodology works. You can sort of, kick the tires and see, hey, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? We think that it gave us some interesting insights about Silver Spring in some ways is better served than most people might realize. In some ways there may be some shortcomings, but you can begin to see concretely how this will be applied elsewhere by using the example of Silver Spring.
And are you going to follow that planning, process along with additional programming in Silver Spring as a result of this, or what's the connection between
that
hypothetical and
becomes the basis for trying to evaluate if there's a development application or there's an acquisition opportunity, or perhaps there's just an opportunity to add more programming in a particular place, or some more equipment, maybe some play equipment or something that facilitates social gatherings, those sort of things. And so, of course, we can get started using this right now in Silver Spring, but then the next step will be to apply it to the other areas in the county. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, we are also coordinating with the planning department. We understand that we have some budget connected to the placemaking efforts. So
Yes.
we are talking to Robert Cronenberg in order to take a look in these recommendations and see where we can apply. Right. We also gave a tour in our park speaker series to Peter Harnack, and he suggested a couple of things within these sites in Silver Spring. So we're going to be coordinating that.
Great. So as you said, so we did the Silver Spring placemaking series 2 years ago, I think, and that enabled you to get some funds from development as it was coming through, sequestered, and so this would provide potentially a way to apply those
Yes.
fundings. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Great work. I'm excited about this. I've had a chance to experience the urban park model playing ping pong or something in an unexpected setting, and it's it's very memorable. It's a lot of fun, so it can really enliven an area.
It's really kind of cool. This is the first time I've seen a planning-based map or GIS map of Silver Spring that had the purple line on it. Like, already there. Kind of nifty. Mr. Hucker, did you want to weigh in? Oh, well, George?
Just a quick question. Could you get to me the ratio? I was responding to a constituent who complained that we have no parks in Montgomery County. That's constituents are inclined to make exaggerated statements sometimes. And what I wanted to do, I was looking for it on your website and I couldn't find it, is what is the ratio of park acreage to county resident? I'm sure you have that. And then how does that, I thought in your POS plan you had it, but I couldn't find it. And then how does that compare? There's a national standard for that. And where does Montgomery County rank in that? If you could just email those statistics to me, I'd appreciate it. Yeah.
We can get that to
Reed,
you.
I'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
National Park and Recreation Association does
Yeah.
a lot of benchmarking in
Right.
that exact area.
Yep.
Mr. Hucker.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought NRDC had recognized Montgomery County as having, you've cited this.
Well,
George, I
that's
believe.
farmland preservation.
Farmland preservation, that was it, okay. But yes, we do have a lot of parks, and I know elected officials
There's
never,
parks and
ever,
there's
ever
open space
exaggerate.
and there's farmland, there's a range, yeah.
Anyway, nice job, everyone. I'm very glad to see the Parks Department taking this sort of intentional, rational look at where and how large our parks are and how they meet our goals. And I'm very glad you chose Silver Spring and the CBD for the pilot, if that's the right term for it. I frequently hear from constituents about the great need they see for additional green space in Silver Spring. We have open space, as the report says, but not enough green space. And people are really hungry for it. So I want to echo that that assessment you've made. And obviously, it's really timely with the opportunities to redevelop that are tied to the Purple Line coming through. This is very timely. I do think it's smart to give property owners more flexibility and to do so in a really intentional way and a transparent way, in a way that meets our public goals. And I'm glad we're adding the language about green space. I know there's also a lot of research, Mr. Chairman, about public health outcomes that benefit both physical and mental health from additional park space. So maybe there's room to add that too. The little hobby horse that I have that I'm reluctant to raise here is Veterans Plaza. I didn't see on your matrix, but Veterans Plaza, I think if it were designed today, wouldn't be quite designed the way it is. And I was among those folks 10 years ago who wrote into the county when I didn't work for the county at the time saying, hey, you might want to consider more grass here, more green space of any type. The AstroTurf that was there was always seen as temporary, but it was very well used and popular. And since Veteran Plaza has been designed, while it's striking and beautiful in some ways, it's a big heat island for sure, and it's very lightly used often in the hottest days of the summer for sure. It's a big impervious surface in the center of Silver Spring. I'm not sure it's as well used outside of scheduled festivals and stuff as the AstroTurf had been, which was obviously a very cheap and temporary solution. And I think it just, while it has its appeal, I think it might be all the big brains in the Parks Department, the Planning Department, it might benefit from some contemporary thinking about it for an update. One thing I hear from people is just, how the lack of any kind of tree cover. You can see if you go there in July, people are, often huddling under the very small trees that provide very small amount of shade there. Plus the ice rink, which some days is popular and some days not this time of year. In the off season, it's just a big pad of concrete. And I've heard people in your business more than mine suggest that there are durable padding, like gym mats, other things like that, that could be used in settings like that attract more kids and other things rather than just concrete that often has a lot of gum and other things on it. So I would just encourage you, while you're thinking about the Silver Spring CBD, to think about if there's any way to update that plaza.
I just want to make any additional information. So we are creating an urban parks advisory group as part of our urban parks design guidelines and operations document that will supplement the EPS plan. And the manager for operations of the Veterans Plaza and Civic Building will be part of our advisory group.
Great.
So we might be able to raise that question.
Thanks.
I'd also add, Councilmember Hucker, your comments very much echoed the comments that we heard, particularly from Councilmember Navarro on the early iterations of the plaza at the new Wheaton building, that it needed to have greenery in addition to hardscape, and we worked hard with the design team to try to achieve that in that location.
I also wanted to point out that the one recommendation that we had in the matrix of opportunities where we made an edit to it, the one for the Whole Foods parking lot, we specifically recommended that should that site go through a complete redevelopment, that a green space that with potential active recreational kind of amenities would be a nice complement to the Veterans Plaza, Civic Plaza, because that's right next to it. And that is definitely what the analysis showed for Silver Spring, not just a lack of green space, but a lack of active recreation for both children and adults.
Okay, well, I think that we can send this on to the full council, Marlene, without any changes, which is kind of remarkable. Certainly accepting the language that's been provided. So great. Thank you, Tom. All right. Now we have 2 zoning text amendments. Yes, thank you, everyone, for your work. We've already seen these once before, and Mr. Zients has been laboring over them to help us to get to some resolution. The first one is zoning text amendment 17-13, public taking. When we took this was a modest effort to render non-conforming property that had been affected by a taking for public purpose, like a road or something. And we were concerned about the equities of that for the property owner who is left with a reduced size property.
Right, and for, the committee asked for an alternative to allow them to build as large an addition or increase in the mass of the structure as they would have been allowed before the taking. The easiest way to do this is, of course, to delete the phrase "but may not be enlarged," so that it would just read that it can be.
Repaired, altered,
It's
or
legal, may be repaired, altered, or reconstructed. If you want to be more, I think legally that would accomplish what you want with reducing words. If you want to increase words, if you have a budget for that, although remember we're on a savings plan.
well, ordinarily, I mean, just taking out a few words satisfies, I think, our objective. Why would we add additional language?
Only
Just
if you want to
fun.
satisfy yourself, so it's specifically written. But I'm convinced DPS would interpret this to allow enlargement if it did not prohibit enlargement
Yeah.
under alteration.
Well, why don't we just,
It's fine
well,
with
if
me.
my colleagues are okay with that, why don't we just name it?
I am okay with it. I'm just idly curious. Is the availability of either, having a conforming use or expanding the size of the improvements on the property, is that likely to affect the government's cost in providing fair and market compensation? I mean, will that be factored in? So I'm taking a piece of your land, I'm building a road, I'm paying you the fair market value. The fair market value presumably incorporates whether or not the land is still useful. So this zoning text amendment could presumably actually diminish the payment. If the land is still useful, then the compensation for loss would be less.
That's exactly correct.
Yes.
And of course, it's easier to say what's the value today and the
Right.
value tomorrow for a willing buyer, but this will take a little bit of effort to say, but you can build as much as you can before, so that the taking is less onerous. It will cost us less for the taking.
Yeah, I have no objection to deleting the language, but may not be enlarged.
And then we have a question about parking.
Well, I think the committee was okay with this to include surface parking spaces. There's always the debate at DPS of whether a surface parking lot for which sometimes they may not have issued a permit if it's not, within a site plan or anything, whether that is a structure or not. So to avoid that problem, it's easy just to put in or surface parking lot or parking lot.
So a
in those two
lawful
places.
structure or parking lot.
Correct.
Okay, anyone have a problem with that?
Nope.
We're good,
All right, 3-0.
yeah.
I have to keep score,
It's very important.
important. Okay, now
We
we're,
have the
that was,
somewhat more complex one.
right, we're on to ZTA 1710. This is White Flint to the Park Lawn Overlay Zone. When last we left this, we had an extremely well-thought-out, written-down document of staff's proposal.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
And then, Councilmember Florine had other ideas that she was describing to the committee, and the committee asked for that to be reduced to writing.
So I do apologize for that. We had just been thinking about it and hadn't really quite come up with the words to achieve it. The real issue, I think, at least from my perspective, was how to achieve everything that everybody wants on this property and allow some modicum amount of flexibility here. I think there's agreement as to the total floor area ratio number that the council had concurred in, and that there would be a balance between potential residential and industrial. And then the tricky part was how you could anticipate how projects might come in. There was a lot of concern, if you recall, about the community and property owner interested in a residential sort of community center thing that might not really be might include a portion of this large site, but not all of it. And so how to permit that to occur while also achieving the goal of preserving the industrial uses or some portion of those. So we took our hand at that, how to sort of create a flexible process that would ensure the potential, well, ensure some preservation and allow for some residential. And so the challenge has been just getting the language right. So that's what, and the way it had been drafted by staff is that it had a requirement that you had to include industrial no matter what. And the challenge, because of this site, as the committee may recall, is that there's different hunks of property in it, and that may or may not come in together. So that was part of the challenge. How do you get this achieve this overall objective while not knowing how it might evolve over time? Because we didn't want to make it so onerous that nothing would happen. And that is always the challenge with this, but not to make it so open that everything could happen. So that has been the challenge of trying to make it work. So I wanted to thank Mr. Zions for his help in putting together the language that I was proposing, and he has shown the changes. Really, if you see at the top of page 2, those are the changes. Is that right?
Again,
Yeah, those are the only changes there that would basically make it clear that residential uses could only be 0.75 of the half of the total that would be permitted. That non-residential uses had to be 0.25, either existing or new. And there's some additional, and then there's language with respect to how you would address the other industrial uses there.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So I regret I'm not able to support the chair's amendments, and I do understand that the property owners seeking them, but we have a shortage of light industrial space in the county, and I think where we have it, we need to be vigilant to continue to make it available. I think that there are trades and employment opportunities that can only take place in those zones, and it sounds to me, if I'm understanding this correctly, this is very complex, but it sounds to me that the effect of the chair's amendment would be we would load up the property with a lot of new neighbors who would then object to any new light industrial because it's noisy and there's banging metal and that sort of thing. And we've experienced that before when you build townhouses next to the solid waste transfer facility. Turns out the residents don't want a solid waste transfer facility, even though it was there before they moved in, and other similar circumstances. So I think that if I'm perceiving this correctly, I think the long run effect of the chair's amendments is to make it substantially more difficult to have light industrial, and we are trying to preserve light industrial, and that was the intent of the master plan. So if I am misunderstanding, I'm happy to be instructed that I'm wrong, but I don't believe I'm in a position to support the chair's amendments.
Sure, well, I understand that. I think the challenge with that under fundamental point, of course, is if there is a residential there of any sort, that tension is going to exist.
Well, we were pitched on this as there was going to be this groovy new loft concept where people would live above the factory, and that doesn't exist anywhere else. And now we're being pitched on something different, which is really just give us a whole lot more residential. So, when I first heard about these groovy lofts that don't exist anywhere else, the question that came to my mind was, if they don't exist anywhere else, maybe there's a reason why they don't exist anywhere else. But in any event, I think that this is an area that benefits from having light industrial space, and I think the long-run effect of your proposal would be to diminish and make it more difficult to provide.
Okay? Mr. Reamer?
Good. Well, I definitely also want to preserve the industrial uses there, and I feel very strongly that industrial property, you can't make more of it, and you need to hang on to what you have. So, but my approach in this particular location has always recognized that there's a lot of property here that's not being used industrially, and in fact, there's some very standard commercial strip center property there, and so I'm comfortable with residential replacing that type of property use. But I think the way I'm comfortable with the chair's proposal with an amendment, which is just to clarify that existing commercial, retail center doesn't count towards the industrial, non-residential gross floor area. So Jeff can maybe help me with the precise ZTA language that is needed, but that's the general thrust of it, is that, and I believe in my intent here is I believe that if we say that, that strip center can be replaced with residential, that the overall result of this will be that the large industrial buildings will be retained and new development will happen where that existing commercial center is. And that therefore we'll get the best of both worlds. And I do, recognize Councilmember Leventhal's observation about the change over time that could result if residential is yet one step, one orbit ring closer to the industrial. But nevertheless, I think that what happens in those kinds of buildings changes over time, and they can be compatible with residential use that is closer. And I think there's plenty of desirable industrial uses that can be proximate to residential, if not necessarily, in the same building. And so I think it strikes a good balance to allow residential to get close to it, but nevertheless preserve what we have. So that was my objective in this clarification to the chair's amendment.
Frankly, mine too. And if you have better language, I'm fine with it. Do you have an idea of?
Let me get everybody on the same page number. Let's try circle 6 in the packet. And this deals whereas with what are the minimums that must be in a development. Before there was a minimum 50% non-residential, that's out in this alternative. It has a minimum 0.25 FAR provided for permitted uses in the light industrial zone, which must be existing or built concurrently with the residential uses. Couple of things right away. Permitted uses is a defined term in the zoning ordinance. If you stick with this word, it would not allow some of those things allowed as a limited use. Within the limited uses allowed in the IL zone are retail uses in particular. And within retail uses, there's a limitation on the limited use, even, to say that only 35% of the development could be for what we'd consider as general retail. And believe it or not, it's called other retail.
This is the brain cramp part of it.
I'm sorry. But to accomplish what I think Mr. Reamer wants to accomplish is, number one, on line 57, permitted is struck for the word allowed. So that way it deals with the limited uses allowed in the IL zone. And number two, it's, and I haven't word crafted this, it's however, the other retail uses allowed in a particular code section, which is subsection D of the zoning ordinances, does not constitute part of this minimum. So you can't count the grocery store,
Retail.
the general retail. Sure. And if you want to see, let me hand out at least to the committee. It's
Oh, okay, I have a copy of this.
D down there.
Sure.
So that from that minimum, you're really trying to get something that's more akin to real light industrial. It's a little bit complicated, but I think that exclusion will work from calculating how to get to the 0.25.
You could just allude to these, this part of the code.
I will.
Do A, B,
And then
A, B,
in
and
the
C.
next provision, you actually have a maximum for that type of limited use as well. So it has a minimum and a maximum
Yeah.
for the general retail. But I understand what you're getting at, and if directed to, I'll provide you language.
Well, I'm certainly, I thank you for that. It's been hard, given the way we wrote the IL zone, to respect this objective. But I think my understanding of where the council was is to find a balance, but to allow some flexibility. And how that was achieved, yet, at the end of the day, certainly retain the industrial uses, which, we all really want to see retained to the extent humanly possible. And this would cover that whole, and this is all limited to that whole sort of quadrant east of Park Lawn, south of, is it Park Lawn, Nicholson? Park Lawn, that shopping center area and the property next to it, right?
Well, again, it's interesting. I don't deal with the map issues.
But we do.
Right. So you asked me a geography question, I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, fair enough. That's not for you to have to
But again,
validate.
this is a different approach. The 50% in Chairman Florine's method is to say you can do 50% of your FAR as residential, which is a 0.75 FAR, and you must include this 25%, something other than general retail, non-residential uses.
Yeah, that's fine, as far as I'm concerned.
But you're still allowed to proceed with the residential without including the?
Well, again, you can include some existing things on the site that must be 0.25 FAR.
It also always required that it had to be concurrently provided.
You don't have to build
A minimum .25 must be provided for the conversation we've been having is about what exactly are those uses?
So you can
you'd
take
have
the
to-
existing
You could get credit for
industrial,
that.
and that would satisfy the
Yeah.
requirement.
It would.
Right,
could.
so my concern remains that you're going to build in a whole lot of neighbors who are going to object to,
I think that
The
is a,
industrial,
it is
so-
a risk, it
yeah,
is a risk.
that's my concern.
But just remember, the council agreed that there could be residential here.
Yes.
Here again,
So,
but,
I mean,
but
that's-
what's the staff proposal is that each new development must have both residential and industrial, so that when the folks are moving in, they know that that's going to be there, rather than having the residential first and then later adding industrial that the residents will object to.
Well, can I
No,
comment
this
on
still
that?
requires that.
I don't think new industrial will ever be added. I think there are only, I mean, I'm just talking here, but I think it will only ever be preserving the industrial that is there. So they will move into a setting where there is existing industrial property, buildings. That's my personal,
Well, and under any scenario, the language is that it must be existing or built concurrently, these industrial uses with any residential uses, designed to address the point you
You-
made. We all agree
You
that
do have a
that,
notice provision here too, that at building, that the
Yeah.
residential property owners are noticed when they go to move in or purchase the property, that there are these industrial uses on the site.
and that there are other
Under
limits.
5 here, it's on lines.
So is the planning board staff comfortable with this amended language now?
Including the new amendments that
they were far more liberal in their original prescription than we have come to. But there's a lot of different kinds of uses that fit within industrial use. And if you go there now, you'll see uses that I think are largely pretty compatible with being adjacent to residential.
They're just retail?
No, they're not retail. There's a lot of sports, there's a lot of sports in those big buildings, and just as an example, so.
Well, there are wholesale trades, other sorts of, bathroom supplies, stuff like that, that's there now, and, that would be counted. You may recall that from the tour. So we're, just trying to balance all these moving parts. I don't think anyone disagrees with the kinds of concerns you've raised, Councilmember Leventhal. And that's what the challenge has been, to try to accommodate a mix, and that's why it's required a lot of careful drafting here to make sure that this was manageable under the process that the Planning Commission would manage when any application might come in. Because as you may remember, applications come in they might come in with a whole property, they may come in with some subsection of it. We don't know.
Okay.
So all
Well, you've
these
got a
things
committee
could change.
majority for this
Yeah.
anyway, so
Okay.
there's no need to belabor it.
Okay, 2-1, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
one with amendment.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zions, and everyone who's helped with that. Now, the next item is just a update, really, on how the current options that we have for preserving and achieving more affordable housing in the county. What we discovered when, in the process, at least my office discovered in the process of working on the MPDU ordinance, we got all these kind of great suggestions from people. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you do the other thing? And it turned out that we already do some of that stuff. And so folks had not fully appreciated this. And so it seemed that before we get into the MPDU ordinance, which won't be scheduled for a couple weeks because of various schedules and the like, that we'd get started with sort of an overview of what tools we have now, because we've gotten lots of great suggestions from the affordable housing community and the nonprofit world and others as to, well, why can't you do that? And why didn't you add this? And it turns out, if you ask Ms. Killian, oh yeah, we do that. So, with that, Ms. McMillan? You want to? Did I summarize it? Okay, so, folks, Mr. Snuggs, you want to start off?
Good afternoon, everybody. Clarence Snuggs, Housing and Community Affairs. I have with me Stephanie Killens, who's our Affordable Housing Program Director, and Jay Green, who's our Housing Chief. And we're going to talk a little bit about affordable housing. I would say that the term affordable housing is a relative term. You have to answer the question, affordable to whom, in answering that, and it goes across the spectrum, so I want to put that in perspective. Different folks have different perceptions as to where we are on that line when we talk about affordable, but it's something I think we want to clarify. You know, everything that we do in producing and preserving affordable housing, we do through partnership and leveraging of resources. That's how we approach the task that we have, and every deal that we have has a level of partnership and leverage in it. And I think key to our ability to make that happen is taking a look at the situation where you know, every deal is a little different, and so we have to have some flexibility in the use of those tools that we have and the ones that we hopefully will have going forward to be able to make that deal work and to make it work in the way that it reaches the goals that we set for ourselves. So what we're going to try to do is highlight some of those tools and strategies. We're going to focus a lot on our sort of our workhorse, which is Mpdu. We've been around since 1974. First deals were done in 1976. But we also have some things, you know, right of first refusal, low-income housing tax credits, our work with our PHAs, with the vouchers, rent subsidies, development financing is a huge piece of that, as well as our focus on special needs and homeless families. And so it takes a combination of those things in order for us to be able to pull a deal together there. I haven't seen one where we did one source of financing that make a deal come together. So it's really important, especially if we're focusing on achieving multiple layers of affordability, as I say, across the spectrum. We really have to combine those tools and make that work. So I'm going to ask Stephanie to walk us through the slide deck, and we'll happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Stephanie Killian. I'm the manager of the Affordable Housing Program section of the HCA. We manage the Mpdu program, Workforce Housing Program, a new weatherization program we'll be talking to you about soon, and a single-family rehab program that we're getting started up as well. But today we're going to talk more on the new construction and development and preservation side. As you mentioned, Ms. Florine, during the rental housing study and in other studies, and as we start looking at the revisions to the Mpdu program, we thought it was important to kind of step back and look at the full range of programs that we have. Montgomery County has, as one of its tenets of its affordable house, of its housing policy and of the general plan, that we would ensure a full range of housing choices for all populations. And so you see here sort of a representation of the different programs we have and how they serve all incomes. So we have programs serving lower income households, which is, in my definition here on the housing side, is under 50% of area median income. So we have.
What's that number now?
I have that, right?
Around 98. It's around 90. Which one? The 50?
AMI is 90.
Around that,
98,000.
So half of that is 40-something.
50 is by 55 for
For a household of four.
four.
Household.
Around 55,000 per household of four. So on the lower income side, people often forget how many units we have and how much affordable housing, many programs we have already. There are about 7,000 housing choice vouchers administered by HOC. We have about 1,700 lower income households that are served by the County Rental Assistance Program. We have more than 9,000 federally assisted income restricted units that have low income housing tax credits or other type of federal financing. We do try in the housing.
9,000? Is this data on one of these sheets?
Is it the data on here? No, we can get you that information. We have.
When we're done, yeah.
We have, this information's from about 2014, and we're updating that information now. Every day, when you do a list of affordable housing projects, the next day it's out of date. So
Sure.
it's interesting trying to keep it up to date. One of the other things we do with our programs is we try and set aside about 10% of any units, especially in a new construction deal, that's financed through the Housing Initiative Fund to households at 30% of area median income. Sometimes we don't achieve it, but it's our goal every time. And then in the MPDU program, about 1,700 units are owned by HOC and nonprofit organizations, and most of these serve lower income households as well. Then we move over to the green or the next block. You see our programs that primarily serve moderate income households in the 50 to 70% of area median income range. That's where our, yes, sir.
Sorry, can you restate what you said a moment ago regarding the lower income? You try to set aside,
When we're, Clarence used the term deal a second ago, and I noted it because in the MPDU program, we don't use that term, and I'll go through that in a second. But when we do have projects that are financed with the Housing Initiative Fund, we try and put enough money into the deal through our Housing Initiative Fund to be able to write down about 10% of the units to 30% of area median income.
when you are part of a housing development, when you're providing financing, your internal goal is that 10% of the units will then go to the, no,
10% of the affordable unit.
the affordable units will go to 30%.
Right. And just to, from the financing side, that pretty much means the Housing Initiative Fund is financing 100% of the cost of that unit. The rent would then cover operating expenses. So it's a significant investment.
The way we tend to do that is to use funds in the rental assistance, and we capitalize that project. So those rents are not only written down to 30%, but they're written down for the long term. We're able to attach long-term covenants for those units at 30%.
So can I, example, like the Wheaton, right by the Wheaton Metro, I think the county, HIF was involved in that big tower there, right? Or
The Exchange, that one? Is it with Wheaton Safe?
Safeway Tower? Is that,
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
too old?
before we had.
Okay, that
Well,
was the old regime?
The latest example we can give.
Give me a,
The Bonifant. At the Bonifant, we wrote down the rents, and so 10% of the affordable rents, which would be.
Bonifant is the
13 to
new senior affordable right by
next
the
to-
library.
That's right. So we have 30% units.
At White Oak.
Excuse me, I hope you don't mind, we're just going to jump in as we go along, because this is complicated stuff, which has been shared with us over the years, but now we're really focused, so forgive us, rather than waiting to the end. So go ahead, George.
I have a question about the Bonifant, which was just recently raised with me. A constituent said that he attended a meeting, and the residents of the Bonifant said that where they had lived prior to moving to the Bonifant, and they were not from Montgomery County. They had applied for units. They were from Wisconsin, Minnesota, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. Do we prioritize Montgomery County residents in the awarding of these units?
We do on non-elderly projects. We ask and we work with the developers to set a selection criteria that gives preference to Montgomery County residents. On elderly projects, we don't. And I've actually talked to a number of the residents at the Bonifant. Generally, elderly residents don't move, seniors don't move from Wisconsin to Montgomery County unless they have a connection here. So I talked to, my experience will be anecdotal. I talked to about 5 residents there. 3 of them had not previously lived in Montgomery County, but they had before, and their children were there, and their niece was there. And they came to that property because they had a connection to Montgomery County.
But, okay, but are we
They were
leapfrogging
former
over Montgomery County residents who are waiting on a list somewhere in order to accommodate someone who's moving in from outside?
No, we're not leapfrogging over Montgomery County residents.
So can we assume that if someone, I understand that elderly folks will move to an area to be close to family. I heard that. But when that occurs, is that because there is not a Montgomery County resident on a waiting list who wants that unit?
We don't have that rule on senior properties. On a non-senior property, we would give priority to Montgomery County residents that have HIF financing. Because of the issue of if seniors come, like I said, if seniors come to in Montgomery County, they have a connection here. They either previously lived here or have family.
So refresh my memory, how were the apartments awarded in the bond fund? Who got them? First
It
come,
was
first served?
First served. The MHP and the management company did send out a lot of information to our senior centers and worked within our existing structure to get the information out, but it was first come, first served.
And isn't there some sort of MPDU waiting list with seniors on it? I mean, would we not make some effort to place people who have already been waiting for affordable housing who are county residents?
Not on the rental side. We don't keep a waiting list at the county on rental MPDUs. Each property maintains their own. But like I said, we did reach out to the senior centers and make sure that information got out to them.
We don't have an MPDU waiting list? I thought we did have.
Yeah.
For anybody.
Aren't there county residents who would want to be on such a waiting list if it exists?
The rental MPDUs are handled at each property. The intake is handled there, and the waiting lists are handled there.
I think this bears further discussion.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm surprised that, about the distinction between senior and non-senior units. And the rationale for that is?
Again, that typically, I mean, almost exclusively, seniors don't move from, one side of the country.
Well, I know, but Montgomery County
rented
residents are equally needy, deserving of benefiting from the use of their tax dollars. Some would say more. And so query why the I can see that you can justify it, but the question is, why? And is there an answer? When was this determined?
Like I said, the feeling has when we set this rule that seniors would have a connection to the community. I mean, again, I understand your concern about there not being a checking of it.
Is this a new rule, or?
It's been going on for several years, yes.
Is there any reason why you couldn't require that they have a connection to the community?
This is an internal policy, and we could change it, yes.
I mean, I can think of an example here, in my own family, actually, a family member relocating from Northern Virginia, trying to come into Silver Spring, find a place to live. I don't think the Bonifant was at that time available or something. But that person wanted to be close to family, and they were gonna find a place. But the fact that, you have, anyway.
But it's still a first come, first served basis, and we go, and the property owner goes through qualifying each individual tenant or prospective tenant as.
So why don't we have a waiting list for rental? You let the property owner handle all of that?
A while ago, about 8-10 years ago, the county did hand out rental certificates, and we were handing out thousands of rental certificates. And then people would go to different properties, and there were no units available. And so the decision was made a long time ago that MPDU applicants for rental MPDUs would go to each property. They're going to be filling out the same information. So they don't have to fill in, two sets of forms in two different places. They'd go to the property. When there's a vacancy, they would then fill out the information. So it gave a more realistic picture to the applicants of what units were available and which weren't.
But if you sign up, if you're interested in an MPDU rental, sign up with the county.
No, you sign up, you go to the individual property. You would go to the property that you're interested in and apply there.
So you'd have to know that there was an MPDU there.
We have a list that we give out.
So you provide a list of buildings. So you provide the list of buildings and you say, call them up, there might be rentals.
That's right. We do, when we get notices from the properties that they have vacancies, we do send it out on the Gov Delivery notification list, and we encourage people to sign up for that.
And that's the same with like low-income housing tax credit units. There might be units that are affordable because they were financed with low-income housing tax credits, but there's not a waiting list for when those units come up. I did want to just say something on the very low income. In the bill is introduced, and we'll talk about the language, but one of the things in the bill is introduced is trying to find a way for clients of Health and Human Services to be able to use priority in rental. Because what's happened over the years is that nonprofit partners have been very willing to purchase when there's a purchase, and then they use it as a rental for very low income or their clients. On the rental side, the model hasn't really worked. There are a few organizations that partake of it, but generally in the priority marketing period for rental, it's not used the same way it is for purchase. And so, for example, if you had low-income clients on an HHS waiting list for services, even if we want to find a way to use those MPDU, the third of those MPDU rentals, the way we use the third of the sales. It hasn't really worked to date. And so there is some language in the bill as introduced that we'll discuss if it's exactly what we want to have, but that was the goal behind that piece.
Well, I'd like us to get the special needs housing people into this and
Yes.
return for further conversation here, because I just feel that if we aren't, we're requiring the set aside of the developer, we're making sure there's a certain number of units, but then there are Montgomery County people who report to us that they're unable to find a unit, and it turns out the units are going to people who are moving in from outside the area. That seems to me, that bears some discussion. You know, I've always said that the ultimate universe of people who would like to have affordable housing in Montgomery County is infinite, because who wouldn't want to live in Montgomery County at below market rate? But that's not necessarily the case with respect to people who are already Montgomery County residents. You could theoretically, through some estimate exercise, get a handle on what is the universe of people, and the rental housing study addresses this, who are not housed or underhoused or, you know, overcrowded or housed in housing they can't afford. And I don't have those numbers in front of me, but the rental housing study cites them. And yet if those folks are not getting access to units that we are creating, while people are moving in from out of the area and filling those units just because they're quick enough or sophisticated enough or they happen to see the ad or something, I think that's a problem.
So the distinction, though, you're saying, though, that for non-senior projects
That are financed with HIF financing, yes.
that are financed with HIF financing, preference is given to Montgomery County residents.
Right.
But what about the other MPDUs? They're not,
On the MPD program, as far as I know, we've never had a Montgomery County preference for the rental side. On the homeownership side, if you're a Montgomery County resident and if you work in Montgomery County, you get additional points, and that puts you higher in the drawing process, the process we have for someone being able to purchase an MPDU. So you do get priority in the homeownership program. I'll research it. I don't know that we've ever had it in the rental side. Doesn't mean we couldn't, but
well, I would like us to explore that, because I am, you know, I have certainly heard this anecdotally over the years. But then you think, well, it's just, you know, there was a reason somewhere. But if I would have assumed that priority for all these programs would be Montgomery County residents, because our job is not to house the planet. To focus on Montgomery County residents, and there's certainly plenty of people who might, you know, have been here for a short while and then move in, but at least they've already had their commitment to Montgomery County. This, of course, our housing crisis is a regional one. So, and of course, we all know people move around. So this is an interesting, but that would put it in the lap of the apartment owners to make sure that that was the case. But, you know, if that's the rule, that's the rule. Those are we've asked property owners to make those units, to create those units for a reason.
in their ways we could
I just would, we have hired a consultant to do some research for us. And one of the things that we can look at is, well, how many MPDU renters are not from Montgomery? We don't know. I mean, so we can, through a survey, find out how extensive this may be as an issue and come back to you.
So you don't get the information about the renter who takes an MPDU unit, or do you?
We do. We get a copy of the renter's agreement that lists their name, their unit number, their social security number, their income, and their household size. And that's where they're also signing that they agree to comply with the MPDU rules.
So we do include their previous
No, it does
address.
not. No.
But you are confident that the properties are being rented out to the appropriate income band based on the
That's-
reported income.
That much.
Well, yes, absolutely. As Jay mentioned, we've had a consultant do a study of our rental properties. It started off as a vacancy survey, and we're 99% occupied, and several units that are not occupied are in turnover units completely. And it's confirming what we thought we knew, and that is that it's serving the correct income households, and it's serving the population that it's meant to serve. And we'll be giving you results of that study at another time.
From the program administration side, whether folks are qualified, people are qualified, we have a pretty robust asset management component. So we do check these records regularly to make sure that our program is functioning the way we designed it.
Well, and that's important. Well, thank you. This has been a helpful side conversation. We're sorry we've distracted you from your presentation.
I will continue with taking you through
Sure.
the programs. Like I said, on the moderate side, we have our for sale and rental MPDUs. We do rental agreements where if a property has come through the county through the right of first refusal and the county or HOC choose not to purchase the property, then we sign a rental agreement with the property to maintain at least a transition of rent on the property to not have too significant an impact on the existing tenants. We have our HIF financing, which primarily serves in the 40 to 60% of area median income range, as do low-income housing tax credits. And we also use our HIF financing to preserve existing properties and to create new affordable housing.
And that's where preserving may mean to acquire MPDU units?
On this side, it can mean that. We do have 3 properties right now where we're using HIF financing to extend the MPDU rental covenants on a property.
Okay, these are the ones that
with 20-year
expired earlier.
Right. So we are doing that, using HIF financing for that. But we also use HIF financing if we see an existing property or we're working with a developer or a nonprofit where they want to acquire an existing property that has modest rents, and we want to work with them for them to acquire the property and continue the modest rent.
And that would be like the Long Branch or Glenmont situation, where when we did the plans, we're always concerned about properties turning over and then losing their affordability.
The naturally occurring affordable.
Yeah, yeah.
We also work to try to protect expiring federally subsidized housing that have.
Oh, there's a lot of that, isn't there?
A fair amount. I mean, I think the last inventory is about 80 some of those type of properties. And
in the county. We've actually worked over the years to preserve a large number of them so they're in the hands of nonprofits or HOC, or we have long-term agreements on them. But there still are, as the unit properties get older, especially now our 202 properties, which is elderly financing. As they get older, it becomes a different type of way of maintaining it, which is, reinvesting in it. Then we do have, what a lot of jurisdictions don't have, but we do, is some workforce housing and some homeownership programs. We don't have a significant investment or programs in this category, but we have some. We do have our workforce housing program, which is quite modest. We've used it on several county land projects, and we have a couple of private development projects. We have a down payment assistance program with the state of Maryland, where we fund, Montgomery County has funded given some money to the state that they use as additional down payment assistance of up to $25,000 to applicants. We are working with HOC on doing a similar program, and HOC has already a quite robust homeownership program. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we are reinstituting our county single-family rehab program and county weatherization programs for modest income homeowners.
What is the difference between the county-funded down payment assistance program and the HOC program? And why do we need 2 different programs?
Right now, we've started off a program with the state and with matching county funds with their bond finance loans. We did initially with the state, and now we just, HOC also does similar types of lending, and we want to have a similar type of down payment assistance program with them.
why not consolidate it all into DHCA? Why?
So HOC and Department of Housing and Community Development, they're both separately housing finance agencies issuing debt separately. So so HOC is a HFA for the county only, and then the state obviously kind of has other
Having
resources.
two different sources of borrowing capacity means more.
They're like, in a way, they're competitors in a way, in the sense that they're both separate housing
Having them
finance
both in
agencies.
that market.
But to us, they're,
More down payment assistance available than if just one were to do it.
well, I think we may get a different slice of the marketplace in working separately with, especially with HOC. We're looking to try to accomplish something a little bit different than what we did with I think the state program is a sort of a broader brush, and then more specifically targeted. We're working on strategies on targeting. with
Presumably the
HOC.
state program affects somewhat higher incomes.
It could, yes.
Okay, that's a satisfactory answer, thank you.
Okay, and then the final category, it's very significant, important category, and that's financing that we do or programs that we have that provide assistance to people who have experienced homelessness and our special needs population. We use Housing Initiative Fund and other funds to provide funds to nonprofits who will buy or acquire properties. We work with HHS on Housing First and permanent supportive housing. We have about 300 Mpdus that are owned by nonprofit organizations whose primarily most of those units are used to serve special needs populations. The way our program works is with the Mpdu program, that up to a third of the units in any development can be acquired by HOC and the nonprofits, and they get first choice, and that's the type of units I'm talking about there.
So I just want to say about that, Coalition Homes developed Seneca Heights and Cordell, and it's been quite a long time now. And there have been, I've been at a number of meetings where there was speculation about some new aggregation of permanent supportive housing that might come online, some redevelopment or new development. But I'm only here for a few more months, and I sure would love to see something get underway. It's been an awfully long time. I'm surprised at how long it has been since the Cordell development, since we brought in any new personal living quarters.
MCCH.
Well, Progress Place, of course. We had Progress Place.
But
yeah,
we've worked
yeah.
with MCCH through our
Yeah.
Housing Initiative Fund on the acquisition of 3 properties, I believe, through the right of first refusal. They're smaller properties. They're 6 up to 8, maybe 8 units. And we've done that twice in Bethesda and twice in Silver Spring, I believe. And then they are acquiring MPDUs as well.
For us, the part of the challenge, as you all know, is getting the subsidy and the services to go along with the real estate transaction. Because with Cordell, it was the real estate transaction was a very large real estate transaction, but certainly worthwhile, and given the location of it. But it's being able to fund and the soft services component of that for such a significantly large population on an ongoing basis. So we work with the not-for-profits, but that's, I think, a major part of that challenge.
So do you monitor big commercial transactions to see if there's possibility of conversion to something like Cordell? And I'm thinking specifically of the brown office building at the corner of Fenton and Sligo in South Silver Spring that recently turned over, that had been abandoned for a long time. Does DHCA,
850 Sligo?
yeah, does DHCA, explore properties like that when they're turning over?
We work with our partners who identify opportunities out there. We sometimes get wind of things and we share that and try to see if we can make something out of that. But, in the long run, it's going to be our partner on the ground running the project. So it's going to be theirs. So we want to make sure that they have
Partners like
interest.
MHP?
Partners like MHP and, even,
Some.
yes. And even if it's a
So you yourself don't
for-profit,
explore
the
availability?
Octave was a for-profit version of that,
Or coalition homes. So what you're saying is you wait until a nonprofit housing developer brings something to you for financing? For-profit. Or either nonprofit or for-profit.
Right. If we get wind of things, we're going to share information to see who might have an interest in it. But you have to believe in it before we, sort of thrust this on you to say, we want you to do this project, because I don't want to take one of our partners out with a project that has some serious issues in it. So the answer to the question is they come along occasionally. We're always looking for, alternative uses for, old commercial, and 850 is one that we've struggled with from a code enforcement side for quite a while. I'm glad to see that it's moving forward.
How is it moving forward? Is it going to be converted into new offices?
Residential?
Residential.
It is being converted into
Yes.
residential.
Right, which is right down the street from another project that we're doing, which is the 3rd District Police Station.
Okay, right. So it is being converted to residential.
That's the plan that the developer.
So it's not all affordable. It'll be 12.5% affordable, presumably.
The starting place. That's where we get in. We start there because of the law, and then we look to see what other opportunities are needed in the area, and then what we can do with the resources that we have.
And so you are working with the purchaser of that building?
We had to get over a major hurdle. I don't want to bring it out right here,
all right.
but there are some real issues.
But it is definitely on your radar?
Because it was sold from one person to the next, and so there are some issues that we're working through.
Okay, but it is definitely on your radar?
We have worked with organizations like MCCH in the past, or in other groups, when they have an initiative where they come to us and they say, we want to do this type of project like a PLQ. And so our department actually did Seneca Heights. We were the owner of it. We're still the owner of it. And we did the project. And we worked with them to find the Cordell property and work through the process. So we've done that before, and I'm confident we'll do that again as they come to us with different initiatives before they have an address type of initiative.
But we do certainly work with them on the smaller first right of refusal properties, and because we know that fits well into their business model, because the larger ones is just more difficult to put together holistically. But we do understand that portion of their business model. So we've identified buildings as they come up with right of first refusal, and as our partners they're interested, and many times it's worked out.
So it would take us from thinking about deals back to the MPDU program. And there we go. And that's, just remind everybody how MPDUs are created. This is an inclusionary zoning program. It's created through the zoning process. It's when a project goes through in most instances, a new construction project goes through the subdivision and site plan process. That's when the MPDUs are established. It's required in every subdivision that has more than 20 units. It's allowed in smaller ones. And sometimes, occasionally, very rarely, a developer will choose to put MPDUs in a smaller one if there's some design issues that it makes it easy for them. And also, talking about buildings, commercial buildings, MPDUs are required if a building changes use, like from commercial to residential. Over the past 9 years, I don't say 10 years because 10 years ago was 2007. For the past 9 years, the program has been averaging, the MPDU program has been averaging about 308 new MPDUs a year, 126 for sale units, and 182 rental units annually. So we are adding a significant number of units to our program every year. How many projects is there? The question is how many projects is that? Probably 20, I would say, a year. Actually, I have that. I can look it up. We just sent y'all, finally, our annual report. That's a couple of years late. That number's in there. I'll look it up. Speaking of numbers, we currently have about 5,200 MPDUs that are under control. That's about 1,300 home ownership units that are in private hands. I looked at it. Of those 1,300, about 87 are ones that will still have some type of expiring control on them, 10 or 15-year controls, and they'll be expiring over the next 20 years or so, which means the bulk of these are 30-year renewing control units that will not be falling out of the inventory. We have about 2,200 rental MPDUs in about 59 apartment buildings. Plus, as I mentioned previously, there are about 1,400 units that are owned by HOC and 300 units owned by nonprofits. And that's in addition to the other 15,000 units or so that are affordable housing units in Montgomery County.
So is that 5,200 plus 14 plus 300 plus 15?
The 5,200, yes, comes from 1,300 plus 2,000 plus 14 plus 3.
Oh, that's part of the 5,200,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the 15,000 have a restriction around them. It's not, does not include market rate affordable, right? So as we have this discussion about affordable, it has an income restriction on it.
Right.
And we often do have to remind people that the way this program is set up in terms of the way rents are set up or prices are set up is that the M in MPDU does stand for moderate. And so you'll see there that our income limits are for picking a household of 4. For garden apartments, it would be $71,500, and for our for sale program and for our home ownership program for family of 4, the house maximum income is $77,000. On garden apartments, the garden apartment rent is set at 65% of area median income, and our home ownership program and high-rise project is set at 70% of area median income. Our rents are established by looking at basing it on the initial rent is based on the income. So it's 30%, 25%, excuse me, of the, like if it's a 2-bedroom unit, you do 25% of the, of a 3-person household and calculate what rent that would be, and that's where the rent starts off. One bedroom is set at 1.5 persons. Each year, the rents can go up only by the amount of the voluntary rent guidelines that we establish. Our new MPDU townhouses range from about 150,000 to 200,000. The difference is on the size and other amenities and features. What we do is look at the construction costs of that unit and set the price that way.
Those AMIs are always countywide, or is it
Countywide.
sub-countywide?
Yeah.
So just, therefore, you're having a bigger impact when you have AMIs in Bethesda, because 70% of AMI really can't, there's far fewer chances to be able to get a unit in a more expensive market, whereas, in a market that's more affordable, there might actually be market units that are within reach of 70% AMI, frankly.
That's why we believe place matters, and that the MPDU requirement should happen with each development, where that's why we do not entertain for rental at this point in time alternative locations or alternative agreements.
And all our MPDUs are leased up, they're rented, so there is at least some difference between the MPDU units and the market rate units in all areas of the county, because they are below market.
Wherever they are, they're.
Right, that's right, yeah.
Wait, they're below market? Like they're 70%
70% rents will,
AMI
rents.
is not the market affordable level anywhere?
No, our MPDU.
Not for a newer unit, I would say that. I mean,
I would imagine that
there are places in the county where
Close.
the older units
Yeah.
are close to some of the MPDU rents, and so that is true. But for a new unit in all parts of the county, new units definitely below the market of the new unit.
And most of the parts of the county where it's further out, there's more often than not, those new construction units are garden apartments, and they're set at our 65% of area median income range, so they're slightly lower. I hit forward, and so I accidentally skipped this slide, so I'll just tell you what y'all see it. And it's the MPD program serves a range of household incomes. As I mentioned, HOC and nonprofits have units as well. But because the MPDU rents are more modest, it makes it a good program to match with other funding sources or other types of rental assistance. So we do have a number of our households that use housing choice vouchers with the MPDU program. And later, when we give you the results of the survey we've done with our consultant, you'll see that we're serving very low-income residents. So far, they've found incomes as low as $8,000. That household obviously has a rental assistance of some sort, probably a voucher, but we're serving households below 20% of area median income through the MPDU program. On the purchaser side, we are serving a much wider range of incomes than you would think. About 50% of our households have incomes as low, below 50% of area median income. So you'll see, we have the results of the initial results of some surveys that we've done. We'll be getting more complete information. But what we're seeing is that 29% of our MPDU renters are below 50% of area median income. And as you'll see in the pie chart, we have households with less than 30%, 30 to 50%, and then 50 to 70% is our greatest slice of the pie, literally. We do have households that are 70, and they don't go up as high as 100%. They go up to 91%. Those are tenants who have an existing MPDU. Their income is allowed to go up to 130% of our maximum income, and that would be the households in that range. And like I said, we do have about half of our MPDU homeownership certificate holders are below 50% of area median income. The bulk of them are in the 40 to 50% range. But now we'll go back to Tom. This is kind of in the MPD program. If you've seen slideshows from us over the years, PowerPoint presentations, we often have slides like this, which is, can you identify the MPDUs? And hopefully, most of the time, you cannot, because these are 5 pictures, and there you'll see in the top left corner, it's the smaller townhouse on the right, where there's single-family homes and other townhouses in the area. At the top right, that's a duplex, so there are 2 MPDUs in one structure. In the center, you'll see that the MPDU is the one in white. It's set back a little. It's probably a little smaller. The one on the left is actually an actual resale, and it's the one that's there in the red, and then with the red brick. And then the one on the right is Metro Point. It's an apartment building. There are MPDUs scattered throughout the property. Then when we talk about deals, this is where we start talking about how does the MPDU program fit within the financing and the multitude of programs that we have to create affordable housing or preserve affordable housing in the county. So the Bonifant, as we discussed earlier, is a property with 149 total units. 139 of them are affordable. MHP in the past couple of years has acquired the Halpine Hamlet Apartments. It's 50 affordable units out of a total of 67. And the question is, which one of those are MPDUs? And the answer is none of them. Oops, I did it again. At the Bonifant, there's a county lease on the property that extends the same amount of term that the MPDU covenants would have. The property, since it was new construction, did have an MPDU requirement. But since the county lease exceeded the requirements of the MPDU program and all the other financing on it, we did not do MPDU covenants on it. So officially, it doesn't have MPDUs. It does have low-income housing tax credit financing, HIF financing, a rental subsidy, as Jay mentioned, to write down the rents. Some residents there do have rental assistance or vouchers, and it does have a pilot on it to reduce.
So this doesn't count, these do not count as MPDUs?
They do not count officially as MPDUs.
So they're part of your 15,000?
Right, yes, ma'am.
Of other affordable
Right.
units?
They wouldn't be part of our 5,200, but they'd be part of the 15.
But I think the key thing there is that it's because it's on a county land lease.
Right.
So you do have, if there were.
Well, you have control, yeah.
Right. So if you had a new development that had low-income housing tax credits, and let's say the entire building was subject to the 60%, which is lower than the MPDU rent, they might be subject to the 60% AMI limit, but because the county doesn't have control over the building past the term of the tax credit, which is 20 years, they still will require in that situation that 12.5% be designated as MPDUs, and those units would stay in the MPDU program after the tax credits expire.
So I think your point is that MPDU is not the magical term. It's really the controlled
Financing sources?
controlled price or controlled, is that rent?
So it has.
What's the right term to use
So
for
it
it?
comes. The important things about it are it comes into play when there's construction. So either new construction or a renovation office to residential comes into play then, and it has, the MPDU has certain control periods on it.
Well, I know that. I guess the question is just, in terms of how we communicate about this.
Right.
There are MPDUs, and then there are controlled units, I guess.
Income restricted units.
Income restricted units, which is a separate category.
Right.
how much of our housing inventory is in that category?
That's the 15,000 units.
That's,
Income,
so in the 15,000,
income restrict.
they're controlled.
Yes.
What, 15,000?
Yes, they're controlled by federal financing.
One way or the other?
Yeah, low-income housing tax credits, state bond financing,
Out of how many units?
15,000.
Out of how many units?
Total in the county?
Oh,
I
of
don't
all
know
the
that number.
housing
I can
units,
get
a
it
lot.
for you.
Total number of housing units in the county, period?
They're like 3,000, 300 something.
So 15,000 of the 387
Mm-hmm.
Are controlled units, non-MPDU.
And does your 387 include Tacoma Park, Rockville, Gaithersburg?
The whole county.
But the 15,000 number probably does not include
I
Tacoma.
believe most of these, some of these units are in the city of Gaithersburg and the city of Rockville. It's a countywide number.
But Tacoma Park, which has rent control.
But no, it has,
type of
it
price.
has a couple of properties that are on the list as well.
Right.
Where we've done financing.
Right, we're active inside Tacoma Park, I recognize that.
I think the lesson here is that the way to achieve affordability, we go via, MPDU is a way. It's not.
It's a variety of
a
ways.
way. And
Right.
within that, we have a number of different tools that we're
Right.
using and combining and whatever.
Absolutely.
Levers.
And I think another way to look at this is it's an important policy to have a segment of the overall rental housing market, essentially, as controlled with subsidy programs. How large should that be is kind of a overarching policy debate at all times. But we often don't get, I think it's not recognized that we do have a substantial slice of the housing market.
Montgomery County's done just an excellent job of giving the commitment and setting up the programs and getting these housing units created and preserved, yes.
And it might be that a healthy housing market has a fraction of its units under control rather than the entirety of the units under control, as some others have proposed.
The other example I had, by the way, on the slide that I
All right, I've
forward
just put a
was
pin on it,
MHP's
yeah.
Alpine Hamlet. It doesn't have any MPDUs. It was built before 1974. There are the 50 income-restricted units there were created by the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, home financing, state bond financing, and the MHP's mission as a nonprofit owner. And that property also does have a pilot on it. So the next two deals we'll talk about are the Hamptons and the Lindley, which is the name of HOC's new project at Chevy Chase Lake. The Hamptons is owned by the nonprofit organization AHC. It has 230 affordable units out of 768 total units. And the Lindley will have, when it's finished, 80 affordable units out of 200 units. And which one are the MPDUs? Let's see if I can do this. Yes. There are no MPDUs at the Hamptons. Again, it was built before the MPDU program was established through HIF financing and a nonprofit ownership. The units are income restricted there. Now, this is an example of our right of first refusal program and our rental agreements. This property came to the county's notice through the right of first refusal. AHC ended up buying it. If they had not, we would have signed a rental agreement with the purchaser to make sure that the units there stayed more affordable over time to mitigate the impact on tenants.
Even though the significance of this is, under a rental agreement, we may not have been able to preserve such a large number.
And for as
200.
long a time, period. This property does not have a pilot, so it's an example of a project where we've been able to do the financing and work out the deal with the developer and not had a pilot on it. This 700-plus units would be a lot of units to take off the tax roll.
Yeah, when we enter into pilot agreements, do we consider that a credit against the Housing Initiative Fund, or that's just another loss of income that the county absorbs?
It's another loss of income. Each year, the county council through the budget process sets a
We have a
maximum
number,
on how much on non-HOC pilots. So you recognize the expenditure you're doing for that and recognize it in the budget, and to my opinion, take credit for that investment in affordable housing through additional resource. Now, the Lindley.
That's why pilots are a last resort, not a
Yes.
first resort.
Sure.
People come to us wanting a pilot first and then try to work the deal together, but we respond not in a good way. That's a last resort to achieve a level of affordability that we didn't have in the beginning. and to eliminate some of the risk of affordability as we go forward, so.
The state law.
So this whole discussion is very revealing, and is every housing agency, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, the recipient of offers that are put together? I mean, as you describe it, you're not in the business of putting these packages together. You're waiting for the packages to come to you. Is that typical?
We have conversations. I mean, our development partners are out just like any other developer, looking down the road for possibilities of that's within their mission.
Development partners who are not Montgomery County government, development partners who
Yes.
are organizations like MHP, HOC is one.
Yes.
You know,
They're just like any other developer. They have
Right.
to keep their business going. If they're not developing, they're not a developer. So they're looking down the road, trying to determine where the opportunities might exist that meet their mission within whatever they determine is their, the market that they want to be a part of. And we have early on conversations around what it would take in order to make that work. We'd like to see them leverage as much private funding as possible, both loans and equity funding, to come into the deal. And our piece of the deal within achieving a level of affordability is to try to close the gap, the natural gap that exists. But we don't make bad deals good. We try to make good deals better. And so we work with them to keep a pipeline and to really try to figure out a way to make, to make that project sustainable.
okay, but for example, the county, we electeds get asked all the time, is the county acquiring distressed property to redevelop it and turn it into affordable housing? And the answer to that sounds like no.
No.
Do we directly acquire it? No.
You await an outside partner to acquire it and come to you
Or
with
we
a package.
work to match a partner with a property that we know about. For example, as we were talking about federally assisted properties, we had a strong initiative a number of years ago where we identified properties that needed to be preserved and reached out to our nonprofit partners and to HOC and directed them towards some of these properties, especially as they became available.
I think AHC was the first partnership we had was at the Hamptons,
Right.
correct?
Yeah.
And I
No,
think,
it's
and that was partly government discussing with AHC whether they would be the appropriate partner to make that happen, because the county became aware of the sale and had an option under right of first refusal.
All right, and MHP's purchase of a number of units on Glendale with the, in Long Branch, where we had a troubled street. And we worked with them to get them into that neighborhood and help turn it around. So we can do that, and we have done it.
But fundamentally, that's not what you're about. You're not combing through, realtors' listings. You're not aggressively yourself as a department looking for opportunities to acquire. You're awaiting packages to be brought to you for your review and determination as to how much you can put into the deal.
Right. We're looking at especially the naturally occurring affordable housing to determine whether or not there's additional risk that may have come about that we want to respond to. And the first conversation is to sit down with the existing owner to see if we can cut a deal to keep a certain number of those units affordable. If there is there's a likelihood that there's a plan going forward. We want to do that. If the property is going to turn over, we'll get wind of that through the notice that we receive for right of first refusal and determine whether or not there is a partner that's willing to step up to take that on. And the concern that we have is that the deals are getting larger, I should say, are getting larger, and what it takes in order to pull one of those deals together from our nonprofit partners in particular.
Again, if we were to acquire land and try to put a package together, where in most cases, especially in the larger projects, we're going to be a smaller portion of the finance.
Right. You would lose out on the benefit of having all the leveraging that comes from the partner coming to you with its own package.
Where we have done that is on special needs housing projects where you really can't get additional financing. And so like Seneca Heights and Cordell and some others, we've gone to the state and gotten financing from the state. We've brought in county resources from the nonprofit organization, and we've been an active partner. And there are other properties where we've been an active partner working with the nonprofit organizations to identify issues, types of properties that need to be identified.
Okay, so you don't have a rule against initiating the package, but it just works better when you're a smaller part of a larger deal.
Yes, and
We leverage the county dollars farther.
and the resources to actually go and do that research and
Yes.
put together those packages.
You rely
So-
on the outside entity to do that research.
So it's important that when we do have these conversations, that we have, from a policy perspective, some idea of what we want to see. So then developers and not-for-profit and for-profit then can look in areas that we've kind of defined that are important to us, whether it's near transit or in certain corridors. And that's where they look primarily, because they know that's where we're interested. So it's, they don't want to start looking and putting together a package in an area perhaps that we don't have an interest in investing in.
So I have to say this then, that if that is your approach, and I understand from the standpoint of you get, you stretch the county dollars farther. I hear that loud and clear. If we doubled the money in the HIF, it might not matter that much if you don't have outside partners bringing these packages to you.
I would say that leverage is absolutely critical to our ability to be able to get it done. We don't want to do, I don't want to take the HIF and do 2 deals and we're done for the year. I want to be able to take on other deals, different sizes, whatever, through the leverage. I don't want to lose leverage.
Okay, I've been trying to avoid using this adjective, but I'm going to go ahead and use it. I don't want you to take it the wrong way. If you are the passive recipient of proposals from outside, you are only going to get so many of those proposals in a given year. So whether we have 51 million in the HIF or 81 million in the HIF or 111 in the HIF or 191 in the HIF, it doesn't really mean that you're going to get more of those outside packages. You're going to be the recipient of as many proposals as come to you.
We get far
I'm not
more.
hearing that they're passive.
I would say we're reactive would probably be more currently.
Okay.
Reactive.
Believe me, I'm not trying to get anyone mad.
Constantly keeping an eye on what's going on around us.
Okay.
And looking for, trying to find opportunities that match up with our partners. So it's not passive in the sense that we're just sitting and waiting.
But if there were more money in the
Reactive
HIF, then
to
the outside
opportunity.
partners would know there was more money in the HIF, and they would put together more packages.
Right.
Right.
And
Well,
deals that come through.
It's not just money.
And it's not just more.
If I can interject, what we're hearing from people is, well, your rules are constraints on our ability to consider entering into these partnerships. Zoning, of course, is a constraint. The process is a constraint, particularly where the government money is involved. You still have serious costs associated with satisfying various requirements. Is there a better way, particularly based on the affordability of the units? I mean, that's the sort of the political community-based trade-off that we up here face. But there are other elements that go into any project that aren't, they're not just money, are there the things that translate into money: time, cost, unpredictability, availability of land, and the like. And the question is always, can you work out a balance sheet that satisfies our concerns about affordable housing in a way that meets other objectives, and those objectives can switch periodically. We had that debate even in Bethesda. And the question is then, there in other scenarios, what are the toolkit points that are indeed available?
And then I would just say the other place where the county is being proactive is around the county-owned land. And that also sometimes takes a HIF contribution as well. So, when you look at the Victory Housing proposals and when you look at, the old third district police station, in that case, the county's setting forth the tone of what it is that you want.
But the other area is it's the scale of the projects. And one area where we can be very proactive is the right of first refusal. But we do not have enough in the HIF fund to exercise our right of first refusal for a development that's 1,000 units.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot of money. And so it's also scale that if we had more money in the HIF, we could expand in terms of what we can invest in and what we can be aggressive with.
Right.
So it's just not the number
Could
of
encourage
projects, but
more
it's,
proposals to come to you,
yes, and at different scales. We can entertain different scales.
nonprofit and the private sector. Okay, I get it.
And I will just say this because the council's had this discussion before. There's nothing to prevent the executive from asking for supplemental funding should a deal come to fruition that needs more than was originally appropriated. And you actually had this discussion when there was concern with the Victory Housing project out at White Oak. I don't know if you recall this, the council said, no, you need to go ahead with that, and if you have other projects that then would take you over what the original appropriation was, please, please, please come to us with a supplemental appropriation. So just having more in the original appropriation is not, it's not the only way to deal with a good project that comes along during the course of the year.
The final project deal that we had, I just wanted to go over, is this is HOC's Lindley. It's a project that's at the Chevy Chase Lake, their multifamily project. It does have MPDUs, so of the 4 that we've discussed, it's the only one with official MPDUs. Out of the 80 affordable units, however, only 30 of them are MPDUs. There are 10 units that are based on financing, and then 40 workforce housing units that were established on the property by the planning board at site plan. So this is an example that Lindy was given a second ago. So this development will have low-income housing tax credits on it and other financing. We'll have a covenant on there that will make sure the 30 MPDUs are affordable for the 99-year term of the MPDU program.
What is the workforce housing? What is that?
In this instance, the planning board set conditions on there that this project must have workforce housing units. So HOC is setting aside rental units that will be in the income range of workforce housing, the workforce housing program. I think they're setting
Capped
it
at
the units.
100%. This was part of the staging of Chevy Chase Lake. And so it had to have 15% MPDUs, which it does. And then it had to have workforce housing that could not exceed 100% of AMI.
Right. And so they'll have rents that are at that level.
And that was part of the staging? So it's not, they didn't get public benefit? No, it wasn't a public benefit incentive or anything like that?
Prior to that.
Prior to that?
Yes, it was prior to that. This property will have also an MPDU, a pilot on it as well, in addition to the bond financing and other financing.
Does that workforce housing provision still exist, or was that just
This is
language that's
separate
written into the
from the-
master plan?
Yeah, this is separate from the official workforce housing program, which is on the development side. This is a condition of site plan.
This was a condition of staging.
I sort of remember this now. They came in and they said that they offered it, actually, I think. The developer might have, and said would be willing to do it. Is that right, Jay?
Probably.
Yeah. Because I think they needed a little more zoning late in the game.
But these units wouldn't have affected their zoning. I mean, it may have affected how people perceived it, because these units are outside the official workforce housing program that's in the zoning ordinance.
The council looked at, along with planning board recommendations, and
Right.
I'm not, Ms. Michelson could tell you more specifically, but as I recall it.
It's in the plan.
When you looked at the staging, you said if for something to move ahead, a purple line, then it had to have certain things. And so what you required was a certain amount of MPDUs and a certain amount of workforce. Workforce housing in the code allows a workforce housing unit to go up to 120% of AMI, but the council capped it at 100% of AMI because frankly, that's where we needed to cap. And so this was, in order to move forward in the staging, a developer would have to meet those requirements. It was in the plan.
This is rental, or this is?
This
This is rental.
So that remains as that indefinite, the period, or 99 years, the period of that workforce housing level?
It must be, if it's part of the condition of the site plan, my guess is, and it's a guess, that it's indefinite, but we can get that information to you.
Okay.
Being told the workforce is also 99.
On the zoning ordinance, yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
This was a good reintroduction of the whole issue, and we shall continue this conversation.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.